Hello and welcome to season 7 of Movies and Tea. I'm your host as always, El Jones, and joining me of course is my co-host Miss Kim Lowe.
Hello.
And a new season means a new director's filmography to study, and season 7 features probably one of our biggest names to date, as we're going to be spending the season looking back at the filmography of the influential and the one and only Quentin Tarantino.
Well, I mean, to be fair, Ang Lee is pretty big too.
I know, it's just as I say, it's just like when we talk about like movies people were excited coming out, it's sort of like, oh, the new Quentin Tarantino movie's opening, or the new Ang Lee movie's opening up. It's like one of these directors, I mean, both are very visual directors, and we have one that just is so ingrained in the pop culture, not only as a filmmaker, but also for elements of his films, that
right.
Tarantino's like one of these multi-level filmmakers, and at the same time he's basically living the video store geek dream of being able to make the sort of movies that he wants. Formerly a golden boy of the Weinsteins, he's now obviously as a director still being heavily courted by studios, as seen by the case of when we came to the selling of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where he also basically got the ability to remake Star Trek as well as part of his signing contract deal. So, but we're obviously getting ahead of ourselves slightly there, and tonight we're going to be going right back to the start with 1992's Reservoir Dogs, his feature-length debut. And when it comes to Tarantino, I mean, is he a director you sort of watched everything that's sort of come out, Kim, or is he someone you just now like looking to fill in those blanks for?
I'm definitely filling the blanks. I think I'm more, it's a very odd relationship that I have with Tarantino movies. And it's something that I've wanted to revisit for a while, mostly because, I mean, I think people find it really weird, but I mean, when Kill Bill came out, I think I was 15 or something like that, and 15, 16 probably, and when the movie came out, I absolutely hated Kill Bill. I thought it was an absolute waste of time. Hated every second of it, and it was my cousins who dragged me to the theater, and I saw it, and I was so bored.
Yeah.
And then I watched it again a few years back for a podcast recording. Not ours, obviously. And I ended up realizing that it was a lot better than I had remembered it being. And I think that that's the case for, I went through the same thing when we went through Ang Lee. Where, some movies, the first time I watched it when I was younger, I didn't really appreciate it. But I think now, as you get into movies and you get more into pop culture, and you a lot of the different things, the little details that they use and techniques and stuff, Quentin Tarantino really has a lot of it. I can't say I'm really big on his like the stories that he likes to tell, maybe, or I don't know, the plot lines in general sometimes, but I do think that there's always something that's really, like, there's some kind of tension and some kind of fun to it in a very, very odd way. And yet, a lot of times it does work, So, it'll be interesting to go and revisit some movies, because, I have seen a few of it. Like, I think it's kind of like maybe a little less than half that I've seen. But, I have some that I watched in recent years and I didn't really like, and then some that I watched a long time ago and I remember very little of. So, it's going to be an interesting season, to say the least.
Oh, definitely so, and I think one of the great things about this project has been the ability to sort of go back and reevaluate our opinions of certain directors. Certainly was the case of season 1 when we looked at Paul W.S. Anderson, a director I had essentially dismissed just on the sheer number of Resident Evil movies he's made, and then when you obviously look at some of the films that he's made over the years, and certainly the style of filmmaking that he brings to it, it really sort of makes you really reevaluate your opinions of that said director. So, but when it comes to Tarantino, I mean, I'm unquestionably a huge fanboy of Tarantino's work, just through and through, since I think since seeing the an interview with him on the extras of Pulp Fiction, I've been kind of obsessed with him, because here finally seemed to be a director who seemed to be coming from a very similar place when it came to film as myself. Just how enthusiastic he obviously talked about film, the ability just to reel off film titles. I think it's inspired my own sort of desire to basically watch everything, just to want to be that same sort of film nerdy sort of guy. And then obviously as each film's gone on, has explored different styles, moving on from the crime genre to make his films, which both like heavily referenced to Eastern and Western filmmaking with Kill Bill Volume 1. It was fun, obviously, being able to recognise some of the films he was scrapbooking, and I think certainly when it comes to Tarantino, I think scrapbooking is very much the best way to describe his approach to filmmaking. Some people have obviously accused him of plagiarism, the fact that he borrows ideas from here and there, but his films have always been about the construction and how he may take ideas, soundtrack samples, pop records, and it's how he brings it all together that just makes it so interesting and fascinating to see. And he's a director that only seems to constantly surprise us with each new film that comes out. He's never been one that we've ever been able to sort of pin down and just know exactly what we're going to get from him, making each new release as drawn out as the wait often is, but as soon as you have a new film to come out, it feels like this wonderful treat, this film that you can sort of dissect and spend many an hour sort of going through each of the scenes and try and find out what the influences were.
Yeah, and and another thing is, for Tarantino, I mean, one of the big things was, I don't know if it went on tour or if it was whatever, but I mean, Tarantino had this thing called, there was a Tarantino in concert that had been in Montreal that I went to go see, and it just showed pretty much a lot of acts. Pretty much they acted out a lot of different movies and the musical scenes that went with it. It was like the soundtrack that he used. And I think that was the starting point of when I wanted to reevaluate, I guess, and revisit, or just, visit for the first time his music that he had. Because, obviously soundtrack is also a really big thing in his movies and whatnot. So, I mean, that show was really, really fun. That show was really, really fun, and it was led by Rumor Willis, which was which is Bruce Willis's daughter. So it was like a really, really fun show to go to. So kind of highlighted a lot of movies that I hadn't seen, especially from a musical standpoint, which is kind of something that I look at when I watch movies a lot. Like, I do like soundtrack, and sometimes it's, especially with Tarantino, they're, if you didn't like Kill Bill, you at least like the soundtrack a lot, because it was really, really great. So yeah, I'm excited to see, like where this is gonna go, especially because before we started the show, we were looking at a lot of director trademarks of him, and the little things that it's all a lot in the detail sometimes, and there's a whole lot of different aspects, which I think is probably what makes Tarantino more than just squirting blood and extreme violence.
Oh, definitely so. I mean, there's so many aspects to Tarantino's films that it's hard just to pinpoint the exact trademarks that make up his film. I mean, obviously we've seen recurring themes within his work, such as explicit violence, heavy profanity, the extreme use of the N-word, which certainly didn't do win him any sort of fans with the likes of Spike Lee, who even went on record to say, what does he think he is? Does he think he's going to be an honorary black man using the N-word like that? To which Tarantino responded, when's the last time anyone cared about a Spike Lee opening? So he's certainly one that's never afraid to fire back at his critics, as well as attracting both critical and praise for his films in sort of equal measure as they've gone across. And he sort of hit that set point now with his films where it's kind of like with South Park and Family Guy. It's sort of like people just know what they're going to get, so it's no point even complaining. As I think he memorably put, it's like you don't go turn up to a Metallica concert and ask them to turn it down. People know exactly what they're going to get when they see a Quentin Tarantino directing movie. But when we look at these shots, I mean, he does obviously have favorite shots, such as like the shots are inside a trunk or the long tracking shots. We also see like scenes such as where we have like 360-degree shots as well, and even the use of the God's Eye shot as well, which we will obviously be highlighting as we go through the film, as well as other sort of minor used shots such as his use of black and white, or perhaps his obsession with feet. Which I'm sure will come up on more than one occasion as we go through this filmography. But as I said, to kick things off tonight, we're going to be talking about Reservoir Dogs, his feature-length debut from 1992. This wasn't his actual first stab at film, that being My Best Friend's Birthday, a film that was never completed. But basically, he uses his self-taught film school, where he would rent a film camera at weekends and go out and shoot bits and pieces for this film about a guy who's trying to set up a birthday party for his friend, only for it to go horribly wrong. Many of the elements would later be used to his script for True Romance, which he sold, which went towards funding this film, with a lot of the funding also being helped by his long-term producer Lawrence Bender, who he met at a Hollywood party and basically encouraged Tarantino to get out there and write a script, and Reservoir Dogs being the first full-length script that he completed after he sold True Romance. The film itself is a heist movie where you don't actually ever see the heist. As a group of color-coded cons are brought together, and we witness essentially the aftermath as they gather at the warehouse and try to figure out what went wrong and concern themselves with the fact that there may be a rat amongst them. Even for a debut, the cast is extremely well stacked, with Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, Chris Penn, Steve Buscemi, Lawrence Tierney, and Michael Madison, as well as pulp crime fiction writer, more bizarrely, Edward Bunker, and Tarantino himself starring in this film. The film also marks one of his lesser known trademarks of casting comedians in supporting roles, as Stephen Wright takes on the role of K. Billy, whose radio show K. Billy's Super Sounds of the 70s can be heard punctuating very many of the scenes within the film. But Kim, I mean, when it came to Reservoir Dogs, was this one you caught the first time around? Was it one you're only sort of catching now?
Definitely catching now. I mean, Reservoir Dogs I've known about by name, by title. But I've never actually known what it's about. And I've never really known what... So this was completely fresh to me. I had no idea what it was about. I went in and I didn't know who was in it. So it was just, go in completely first time and then just watch the movie for what it is. And, I think that Reservoir Dogs, obviously we're talking about a later movie, but it reminded me a lot of Hateful Eight. But in a really, like, a better paced way. You can already tell where we're going in Hateful Eight when we get there. But yeah, no, Reservoir Dogs is really, not only is it the casting is really good. I mean, I'm personally a big fan of Tim Roth, so I'm always happy to see him on the screen, And, Harvey Keitel, I never remember him in what he's been in, but I always remember who he is. Like, when he acts, I always think that he does a really good job. The movie is pretty fun. I really like I think the opening scene is one of my favorite moments. Yeah,
the Madonna sequence in the pancake house.
It's just like, it really brings in that whole, his trademark of having the pop culture references kind of embedded inside. And you start off right away and you're watching a bunch of dudes sitting around in their black and white suits, and they're just sitting around, and then they're talking of Madonna hits and, what it means. And then someone's is explaining what the whole Like a Virgin origin from. And then it jumps forward into this whole conversation about tipping and whether you should tip waitresses and whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And the great thing about this scene is the fact that you've obviously got these eight guys who are going off to pull off a heist, that no one is talking about the job. They're just having a general breakfast sort of conversation, and it so happens to be this really explicit conversation about what Madonna's Like a Virgin is about. And this being the first of many of Tarantino's film theories that we will hear over the years. Around this time, we also got his Top Gun theory, which basically said that Top Gun's essentially about, Tom Cruise's Maverick not being able to deal with the fact that he's gay, and that Iceman is essentially represents the the out there gay man saying come to the gay side, and the Maverick spends the whole film not being able to come to it. And when it comes to the Madonna thing, I think this is one of the things that just grabbed audiences right from the beginning, and it sort of really caught people's attention because Tarantino has such memorable dialogue, especially in these sort of early movies. And the fact that we've got this whole speech where Tarantino's Mr. Brown is essentially just holding court, telling this story about what Madonna's Like a Virgin is about, which in the warped world of Tarantino is about this girl who likes to sleep with a lot of guys, and that when she meets a guy with a very large penis, that it reminds her what it's like to be like a virgin. And from here we obviously go on to the Mr. Pink's views on tipping, which I can't help but agree with. I think it's a very valid point he makes. And even while this is going on, you've got Joe, who's like the leader of this, the sort of crime boss who's organised this heist, who's going through this address book that he's found in a coat, and he's basically there pissing off Mr. White, is the fact that he's just sitting there going Wong, Tony Wong. And you've got this whole second conversation that's happening, and just the whole way the scene's constructed, the dialogue just feels so natural. It's not the case of just like one person's talking, so everyone waits till that person finishes talking. People are talking over each other, and it's got a real sort of natural flow to it. And all at the same time, we're getting introduced to each of these characters. We're getting a taste of their personalities. It's like Mr. Pink, here played by Steve Buscemi, this guy who's very sort of opinionated, very thoughtful for the world, and at the same time kind of a motor mouth. And then we've obviously got Mr. White, who's sort of like the older one of the group, and sort of like he's just happy to sort of sit back there, and you can tell he's got this sort of relationship with Joe because of the way that he's just there like messing with him constantly. So it's a simple scene, but it really gives us a sort of taste of who these guys are. And then obviously from there we're just like thrown straight into this heist that's going wrong. I mean, Tim Roth is lying bloody in the backseat of a car. We've got Harvey Keitel basically trying to reassure him, and it's just this, you're like, what the hell happened? Did I miss something here? It's like, we're not used to going from like that sort of iconic walking down the street scene, obviously, to Little Green Bag. And I mean, how many times have we seen that, them walking down the street be like replicated in pop culture? I mean, yes, it's a straight rip off of a similar scene in Clockwork Orange, but these moments we just like look at it, we look at the suits, and we just like think, oh yeah, that's Reservoir Dogs. And you kind of like when you see it in like pop culture now, and you just know what these things are. And it's weird the place they turn. Like you see as Reservoir Dogs joke on The Simpsons, and you think, well, kids have never seen this movie, but I'm sure they probably know what it is still.
Yeah, like I said, I knew nothing about Reservoir Dogs, so I don't know anything. So I might be the only person in the world, judging from where this conversation is going, who doesn't know what that means. But
I'm just envious that you get to watch some of these things for the first time.
Yeah, I think so. I think that sometimes I don't know. I think that it's good. I think in Tarantino's sense, understanding the depth of his movies is really important to enjoying them. And I think that's why watching it now feels a little bit, probably what I can see myself not like disliking this movie if I watched it like maybe 10 years ago, So that's the main thing. Like, my tastes have changed. I can learn to appreciate Tarantino for what it is. And Reservoir Dogs is right from the beginning, you get hooked into this. And it's like you said, you get this really good idea of all these characters, and you get to match their face to a color. They don't have a name, but they have a color to them. And it's really great because of, the non-linear way of how the story is shown throughout, that you kind of know who the main players of the story is. Because obviously you're not following 8 people, or else it turned into Hateful Eight. Which would be a long story. But But you're following here, and then you right away you know who the main players of this is going to be. You know who's running the show, and you know that Mr. White is kind of the essential character there. And then you have the Mr. Pink who goes off on this rant about tips, and then you have this whole other conversation about just these things going on, and it feels so natural. And I think that right away, once you get into that scene and then they get to the warehouse, life and death is at hand right now, and whether they're going to get caught, and where are these diamonds, and also where, is there a rat among them, and who is this rat, and all these more serious questions come into hand and then all of their characters slowly show up, and I'm telling you, like, Mr. Pink was so suspicious. You couldn't tell whether he was, right from the get-go, he's like the obvious guy that you think is just super suspicious. Is he just like really chicken, or he's a weasel, or is he just going to or is he just faking it all, right?
It's the Buscemi, isn't it? You look at him and you think, God, he just looks like a rat bastard. And the fact that he's already shown himself for being like, have these thoughts about the world around him, that, money is very much a key driving aspect for him. The fact that even like tipping a waitress a buck, he doesn't see the point in like, where society says, oh, you must tip, because as he points out, he's like, you don't tip people at McDonald's. It's all like, why do you bother tipping the waitress? And and they're like, well, it's a hard job, and this is how they make their wages. And he's like, no, fuck that, she can go get a job somewhere else, learn to type. So we obviously know that money's a very sort of driving force of him, and the fact that you could see him, as you said already, you could see him as being like the guy who is the one who's going to like turn on the rest and steal the diamonds. And I love as well the fact that as these characters are introduced, we get little flashbacks of how they came to be involved in the heist. I think with Pink we obviously don't, but we get to see him during like the planning stages, and we obviously see like how Mr. White came to join the job. It's like, and then as we go a bit further and we're introduced, Mr. Blonde shows up, who's played with a plum by Michael Madsen. And just when Michael Madsen turns up, the fact that, he stopped off to go and get like a burger and fries, and we already know like what he's been doing to this job because of obviously the conversations that Pink and White have been having, where he's like, they've like said about how he just basically started shooting everyone up. So we're slowly getting the idea of what happened during the heist, even though we never actually seen this heist. But the way these conversations go and as engaging these conversations are, we're building up this picture in our mind of what happened. And I think that's so clever, and it works so well, especially, you've got a small budget, so you can't obviously do this big heist sequence, but you can have it sort of play, you can have characters discuss it so that we think we've seen it, which is very sort of ambitious, especially for a first-time director like Tarantino.
Yeah, I think that's really important because, you always think about heist movies, right? And you always think about a heist gone wrong, because that's what heist movies usually are. A heist gone wrong, you either start with, if you go Ocean's 11, it's planning the heist and executing the heist. And then when you think about movies that execute the heist and then something goes wrong, it's the process of how it goes wrong and then the aftermath. But here, right away, we're in the aftermath already. And it is really, really clever. And I think that's one of the power of dialogue that Tarantino has when he writes, that he's able to give you that vivid imagery of just kind of visualizing that scene. But at the same time, because of the nonlinear narrative that he uses, he also has those like moments of flashback where, you see Mr. Pink running down the street and then doing whatever he does, right? And then, or you have like moments of things happening. And I think one of the best flashes is really in this whole moment where Mr. Orange is telling the story of, he's like reciting the story of an anecdote, and he's telling it, and then all of a sudden you see his character jump between, the club and then the bathroom scene that he's part of. And you just watch this anecdote go by, and you're just kind of watching the scene happen, and it's just so immersive because you're kind of getting drawn into this story that you know is a story at that point, right? So there's so much. I think it's such a fascinating way of how it's told.
Definitely so, and I mean I loved when you were saying about Mr. Pink running down the street. I mean, obviously it's a scene again lifted from the Cherry on Fat movie City on Fire, and I think there's three big inspirations to this film. The first being About Tomorrow 2, which is obviously the black and white suits, Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3, which is the color coded cons, and then when we look at City on Fire, which is about Cherry on Fat's undercover police officer infiltrating a jewelry heist gang. And we obviously have that scene of him running down the street, which we see replicated with Mr. Pink. And unfortunately, there was a lot of stupid people out there who were sort of like, saw that scene and sort of like, oh, Tarantino ripped off City on Fire. And it's like, no, there's about 3 scenes that are similar that are in City on Fire that are in Reservoir Dogs. Yes, he scrapbooks or he pays homage to these scenes, whatever way you want to look at it. But Reservoir Dogs is very much its own beast compared to City on Fire. But you can definitely see that Cherry on Fat was a big influence on him at the time, certainly. And certainly if you look at the original script in the thanks, he gives thanks to both Cherry on Fat and John Woo amongst his list of people giving thanks to. So. I mean, we're just going to say spoiler alert from this point. I mean, if you've not seen Reservoir Dogs like Kim, just go and watch it if we've intrigued your interest already. When it comes to Orange, I mean, obviously Orange is our rat here. He's the undercover cop. And for myself, he has the best flashbacks of the film. Just like his whole sort of getting prepared to sell himself as this character. And as you said, he tells the story about the Kazi, which is one of my favourite monologues. Yeah. I think if I ever need a monologue, then the Kazi story is the one I would go with. It's such a fun story, and as you say, it's like an anecdote that a criminal would tell someone. It's basically where he's got this weed that he's transporting, and he walks into a railway bathroom. Unfortunately, there's like 4 cops and a German Shepherd in there, and he has to sort of figure out how he's going to get out of this situation. And even while the story's going on, you've got the cops who are telling their own story about them pulling over some guy and him not quite understanding what the police officer was saying, so that he almost gets shot as well. And somehow we're never like lost in whose story we're following here. So we've obviously got Mr. Orange telling his story, and at the same time we take breaks to hear this cop's story as well. So I love all the layers to it, but just the conversation he's having with his like handler, and he's like saying, he gives him like this script to read, which obviously has this monologue in it, and he's all like, oh, can you just treat it like you're telling a joke? And he's like, you can tell a joke, and he's like, nope. So.
Yeah, and it's really great because when you're looking at it, and they're trying to get him immersed into this character that he needs to be in for the undercover, so that's why they give him this story that he needs to tell. And the details is that he needs to be able to know every single detail of this story, create it or make it up or whatever, but it has to seem natural. And I think that that's why when we have that scene of the bathroom story, maybe he's not telling that whole cop conversation, but in his mind, he's already imagined that scene where he's in that situation, and then he's going to the bathroom, and then these cops are just continuing their conversation and talking about whatever they're talking about. And then it comes back to reality where he's able to leave and something like that, right? So it's such a detail, like I think it's such a fascinating way to show that whole scene.
Definitely so, and you can see him in his apartment when he's going through the story, and he's going through it again and again, and you can see how he's making like little corrections to the script that he's been given, because he knows it wouldn't fit his character, or it would give away a detail that would slip off. And even, you can see they're like testing him, and they're like constantly like, drop questions into his story to like try and catch him out, and it's sort of like, oh, what were they pulled in for? And he's like, I don't know, speeding tickets or something. So the fact he's got to like think of all these other questions that may come up that aren't even in this sort of dialogue, and once he's in, you see him like have this growing respect for this criminal fraternity that he's now been welcomed into, the banter that they have back and forth, and just the the professionalism amongst these crooks, as they obviously plan out the job and have these conversations between them. And again, it's that case of when they're having conversations, a lot of the time it's not even about the job, it's just about like fun little anecdotes or jokes that they share between them, such as the girl that nice guy Eddie knew at one of his father's clubs, who took revenge on her boyfriend by gluing his penis to his belly, so that every time he had to take a pee, he had to go and do a handstand, which is still funny to me now, even though I've seen this film so many times.
I think that's so great because when you hear that story, you're just kind of like, this ridiculous story that he's telling. It fits exactly into why Mr. Orange needed that story in order to kind of help him fit in with this group, right? Yeah. And it's like I think it's just like the little details, right, of crafting this character and crafting this role and crafting what this world of, I don't know, bank robbers are.
It's sort of like this underground sort of criminal fraternity that they were sort of welcomed into, and the fact that they have this honor code between them, and we see it in other characters' story. The fact that Mr. Blondie's caught in a warehouse with a bunch of stolen goods, and he obviously has the opportunity over the years he's served in prison to basically turn in Joe, but he never does. And this is how we know that he's actually a loyal guy to Joe, and even while other members of the group try and frame him for the, as being the rat, we know that he can't be the rat because he's got such loyalty to Joe. And I mean, even the conversation that he has when he comes out of prison, he goes to Joe's office and they're like working out the way he can get around his parole officer by having this fake job at the docks. It's just, as I say, it just feels always so natural with the conversations they're having. It's never like, as soon as he goes in the office, it's all like, oh, good, you're here, we've got this job going down. Instead, they're just having conversations about, life on the inside, or how he's going to deal with a parole officer. Very sort of minor, everyday sort of conversations when he's obviously not wrestling with nice guy Eddie, who's in his father's office, so...
Yeah, because you see this character that's built from that, right? And then it kind of, where do you draw the line of Mr. Blonde being this person who just opens fire straight out during the heist, which causes this big issue of everything going wrong, or from the root of it, and it makes it even a little bit harder to put together sometimes, because then you have everybody is viewing this from their point of view and their memory. So just like in the beginning at the warehouse, you have Mr. White and Mr. Pink standing there talking about how it went down, and then Mr. Pink has a different version of what's going on and what kind of made the cops, like when the cops came in or when the cops arrived or whatever. And you just kind of wonder, like, well, is it true, or is it just, they're both seeing this in a different way, but still having that same conclusion that, well, there's a rat because, why would the cops have shown up, right?
Michael Madsen, though, as Mr. Blonde, is a very imposing sort of character. And Madsen himself, I mean, he's known, as he likes to say, he's known for playing charming, careless, and terrifying bastards. It's also really kind of amusing the fact he's often associated with these horrific acts of violence, and many we will see over the course of Tarantino's filmography, yet he's completely averse to violence in real life. Yet he's responsible for ingraining some of the most horrific images into our head, none more so than the torture sequence we see in Reservoir Dogs, which I think it made it so, it really sort of made it sort of stand out, this moment that everyone was sort of like talking about when they talked about Reservoir Dogs, and the fact that you got Madsen dancing really badly. It should be added, to Steeler's Wheel, and there's, as he points out himself in the commentary, there's shots where you can see like the ear mic, because he needed the music to be able to dance to, and even then he's sort of like a drunk bear staggering around a bit. So.
But I mean, that scene is really, really fun too, because you don't You don't like, you know, the music turns on, and it eventually, you know, obviously this being, if this was the first movie that I watched of Tarantino, you wouldn't know that this is a trademark of his, but it, you know, as you watch more of Tarantino movies, go watching it now, you know that, you know, music and dance scenes and that sort of thing is really a Tarantino trademark. He really, really likes music, and in this scene, you know, Michael Madsen has that very that very intense moment where, you know, you have a feeling he's gonna do something bad because he has that razor in his hand, and he's dancing, and then you just wonder what he's gonna do next, right? Because from what we've heard, from what we've understood from, you know, Mr. White and stuff, that he's a psychopath essentially. So
yes.
you kind of have this thing that you don't really know, because I think that that's one of the really standout points of the movie is, while we know, we have a general idea of who these characters are and a general idea of their personalities, or the, you know, how known they are to, you know, Joe, who's running the operation. We never really understand until we witness what they're going to do next, right? So for Mr. Blonde, it was kind of this moment where you've heard that he's a psychopath, and you don't know whether he is, but he seems really calm in the situation, and even though they leave him there, it seems like they trust him with what he's gonna do next. And then he turns out to do something, you know, completely wild, where he, you know, cuts off the guy's ear, and then and then he tries to set him on fire. So
yeah, I mean, even before that, I mean, obviously we have the scene where he turns up, and just his presence antagonizes the other two, in particular Mr. White, who, because Mr. Blonde, in Mr. White's eyes, Mr. Blonde is very unprofessional. The fact that he just opened fire, he just shot an unarmed girl, and just turned the whole thing into an absolute bloodbath. Much less the fact that he almost got him killed in the process, and that Mr. Blonde's completely unremorseful of this. And he's kind of like, when you think of like Mr. Pink's view of tipping, you've got Mr. Blonde's worldview when it comes to killing people, and it's sort of like, it was, you know, they deserve to die. They're in the way. You know, it's completely, it's an actor's unthinking to him. Is killing means nothing to him, and even when we get into the torture sequence, he says himself he's not looking for information, he's just doing it for kicks. And yet when he like turns up and he's like presents him with this gift to this cop that he's kidnapped as this sort of like peace offering to the others, and we have that use of the trunk shot where we see the three characters looking down and amused by by what they're seeing, before it's revealed to obviously be this cop. And the cop himself, I mean, obviously, while he might not give anything away, he's obviously there to, you know, provide the tie into Mr. Orange's character, and obviously finally revealed that he's been the rat this whole time. So, but no, the soundtrack itself, I mean, that song Steelers Wheel, I mean, it's just now forever. Whenever you hear it, you just now, your mind instantly goes to the torture scene in Reservoir Dogs, and I think this is something that happens time and time again with Tarantino's films, is that the soundtracks become so ingrained in our head, the often, you know, unnerves and allows audiences to rediscover these sort of pop songs and then twist them with his visuals that he gives us to them. And I think when it comes to his films, I think his soundtracks are just as well known as the films that they feature within, which is no easy task, to say the least. But no, Steelers Wheel was certainly the first of these big sort of songs. I mean, obviously when we get into the likes of Pulp Fiction and certainly with Kill Bill, where we've got that Battles Without Honor and Humanity, which has now been used on every single reality talent show going. When you need some drama, they normally wheel out that song. So. But yeah, and I love the fact as well, when you hear a piece of music in this, it's on the radio, and we have that scene where he goes out to the car to get the gas can, and the music fades out. It doesn't like carry on as we have that tracking shot of him walking out to the car. The music sort of fades out as he goes out to the car, and then it fades back in when he walks in. So it's very clear where the music's coming from when they're in the car, and you've got it sort of punctuated with like the DJ banter as well that often sort of marks the end of chapters as well. So And I love all those little bits where he's like talking about, the history of Little Green Bag and stuff like that. I think it's really cool. And when you listen to the soundtrack, they got all those radio sound bits on there as well. So
yeah, for sure. And that scene was really great because we don't. I mean, for me, it's kind of like, yeah, we've had a few bloody scenes at this point, but we never really see. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe there's an unrated version out there which shows it, but in the version I watched, which is on Netflix, is like the camera pans away and you never see like what he's cutting. Obviously, you have a general idea because of where he's standing. But the camera pans away and it goes to this kind of area, this doorway thing, and it says, "Watch your head." And I loved it because it was just like, there's this graffiti there and all you see is this focus on the words and it's just like, "Watch your head" or something like that. And I just thought it was so like such a little detail to have.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to watch the actual ear cutting sequence, it's a really just a test shot that they use, and it's on the special features of the DVD. But it looks so ropey, it made sense why they never showed it. And as you said already, the camera, it pans away when we see him sort of straddling the cop's lap, and you hear this noise that's going in the background. And it's almost like the camera as the audience, we're looking away from this horrific act. And as you said, I love that bit of graffiti as well that you just pointed out to me, which I never really noticed till now. So that's really clever. And then we obviously get that very sort of black humor there, where he's walking around with the ear and he's tapping it with the razor, going, "Oh, can you hear me?" Which is just horrific. But no, I don't. I hate that sequence so much. And yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of blood up until this point. I mean, Mr. Orange is there bleeding away like a stuck pig on the stairs this whole time.
That's true.
That can't have been fun for Tim Roth. The fact you got to sit around in sticky corn syrup all day.
But then, I really, honestly, I think that all the characters are really good. But, Tim Roth as Mr. Orange is such a highlight character. And I think that when you think about Tarantino and just the movies that he's done with Tim Roth, all turns out to be these really fascinating kind of characters and this fascinating entrances and kind of like that sort of different thing. And he loves to put Tim Roth in a diner.
There's something about Tarantino just loves diners and restaurants in particular. I mean, I think he originally wanted to the restaurants in his films were going to be RVs, but they couldn't get the rights, and this is why you have him like making up all his own brands, such as like Red Apple cigarettes and Big Kahuna Burger, that punctuates his film because he couldn't get the rights for his for Reservoir Dogs to like use RVs and stuff. So he just started making up his own brands that are now featured throughout all his films, and it's become this fun thing for fans of his films to try and spot where these references turn up next. And certainly within his films, there's characters that link to other characters and create this very, very sort of Tarantino universe, which we'll obviously go into. I mean, certainly when we look at Mr. White, his surname's Vega. I'm trying to remember his first name now. Yes, he's Vic Vega, and he's actually the brother of John Travolta's character in Pulp Fiction. And originally there was going to be a film where the two of them were going to be together called the Vega Brothers, but unfortunately because of other projects and the fact that they're now too old, one of those projects is never going to come to fruition. But yes, Mr. White, Mr. Blonde in Reservoir Dogs is the brother of Vincent Vega in Pulp Fiction.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, there's I mean, you can look at True Romance and the studio exec who gets caught with pulled over by the police and has all his cocaine explode over him. The film he's pitching is actually the story of the Burju in Inglourious Bastards, who is his grandfather, I believe. So you can see, he goes even as far back as True Romance, even before he even made Inglourious Bastards, he was drawing these links between characters, and they're just so subtle and fun to see. And like the fact that Kill Bill is sort of like in his mind, it's all like movies within a movie. So if like the Captain Reservoir Dogs went out to see a movie, then Kill Bill would be like the movie that they saw. We even have like a reference to Pam Grier here when they're talking about which is kind of like foreshadowing, because she would obviously be play the lead when we come to Jackie Brown, and I know any conversation that involves that's about Pam Grier is great.
I have yet to see Jackie Brown. That's going to be a first time watch for me, so it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it's one I'm keen to revisit, because it was always like one I never really sort of held in the highest regard. So I'm keen to revisit it, and the fact that it's finally an excuse to look at a Pam Grier movie on the show. So obviously, as the mistrust amongst the groups reaches its boiling point, we end obviously in the Mexican standoff, another Tarantino trademark, and one that was drawn from City of Fire. So it's a Ringo Lam favorite, and certainly one we've also seen used many times by John Woo as well. And the Mexican standoff, essentially, where your old characters have guns pointed at each other, and nobody's going to come off well at the end of it. And it's really from here that Orange finally admits to White who he is, and we get some very interesting noises from both Keitel and Tim Roth, it has to be said. I was having flashbacks when Keitel's doing his sort of groaning to Bad Lieutenant, when he's just basically standing naked, howling into the night. Which is always it's interesting that they also use that as the cover for the DVD for Bad Lieutenant. It's like, why would you use that as the cover for your movie? So obviously, that's Reservoir Dogs. The film is slower paced than the other films in Tarantino filmography, and I think that's why I don't tend to return to it as much. It takes a little bit longer to get going, whereas the other ones sort of hit you with this constant onslaught of things happening. And with Reservoir Dogs, apart from the great opening, we have a little bit more of a slow burn before things sort of pick up in the second half. But I think it's still a movie that stands up. I think it's a great little heist thriller, kind of very much a sort of enemy within sort of story as well. And I think the fact that it's so limited in its sets and and really sort of works its budget, I think just really sort of plays to its advantage, really. Before we do wrap this up, Mr. Blonde was Tarantino had originally written for himself, before ultimately settling on playing Mr. Brown. That's why he ensures that he gets the best dialogue in the film. And Kim, I mean, if you were to obviously choose your colour for if we were to go out and pull our own heist, do you know what colour you would be?
Probably like purple or something. I don't know.
You're gonna
something
be purple.
Like that.
It's funny, my mind went to purple, but my mind went to purple as well for some reason. I don't know why, so I'll be a Mr. Green, I think. A couple of fun facts about the film as well. Obviously, Edward Bunker, who plays Mr. Blue, the elder con who's in it only for the opening and then disappears the rest of the movie. He was actually a career criminal. He wrote a number of great books, including Animal Factory and Little Boy Blue, as well as Dog Eat Dog. And yeah, he's basically a pulp crime. He's a former career criminal turned pulp crime novelist. His books are really great. Lawrence Tierney got into an argument with Tarantino during filming, and the scene where he's giving out the names, Tierney managed to piss him off so much that he fired him, and then had to be basically brought back together by Keitel. Tierney himself would often forget lines and just basically, instead of like stopping, would just keep repeating the same line over and over again. While generally befuddling many of the cast members with his eccentric behaviour, including hanging out with Chris Penn, who plays Nice Guy Eddie. They'd arranged to have a barbecue over the weekend, and Lawrence Tierney managed to befuddle him with this list of about 6 buses he was going to catch to get him. Tim Roth tells the story on the DVD of how the fact that he went out drinking with Tierney one night, and that he would go out, take him out to introduce his friends, who he calls like the guy who invented the glow-in-the-dark yo-yo. And these were his friends, as Roth punctuates it. But no, I think, as I was saying, the film's really, really great. I think it still stands up, and well, obviously Tarantino's gone on to make much more sort of flashier affairs. I think it's still a really great debut film, and one which really sort of marked him out as this exciting talent to watch, really. So, but both of you, and if you like this one, Kim, is there anything you would pair it with at all?
Yeah, I mean, there is a good amount of heist movies out there, and I think that that's the general direction that I took. I don't know why, but I kept thinking about Takers, and I can't really remember what Takers was about, but it was a heist gone wrong. But yeah, I remember Takers being a fairly good movie. And that it was like 2010 movie that was about pretty much a group of bank robbers who has this big heist in their mind, and then they get chased down by this detective, and obviously things go horribly wrong, but it turns out pretty good. But then, I mean, on a better level, I guess, a better heist movie would probably be The Town, also in 2010.
Very good.
Directed by Ben Affleck. So yeah, I mean, The Town is a really good heist movie also. I remembered it being feeling a little different to normal ones, so I kind of like the dynamic of that movie a lot. And I think the last one would be something like, something that fits into the 8 people. It's Ocean's 8. I really like the idea of, I felt like the way that it was executed for Ocean's 8 with all these ladies together that come together to execute this heist was done really, really, kind of really, really clever.
Yeah, fantastic. For myself, and we obviously mentioned already, taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3, the original one, not the one with
John Travolta.
Yeah. Don't watch that. Well, I'd say that it's a Tony Scott movie, so it's not a bad movie. It's just not as good as the original. The original is a lot more tense and thriller. Obviously, City on Fire is a great introduction to not only Ringo Lam's work, but also to Jay, in fact, doing something other than heroic gunplay movies with John Woo. You can also check out Stanley Kubrick's The Killing, which I think is the real key influence here, as well as Kansas City Confidential from 1952 as well. So those are the ones I would recommend checking out there.
Awesome.
As I said, this brings us into tonight's episode. Thank you as always for listening. If you haven't done already, please do hit the like and subscribe button wherever you happen to be listening to us, and maybe leave us a review. You can check out our full archive of episodes at Movies in Tea podcast. Yes, it's Movies in Tea podcast.wordpress.com. And I said we're on both Facebook and Instagram as well, so come and say hi to us there and let us know what you think about Tarantino movies. But Kim, where are we going to next?
So yeah, the next place that we're going to be going is going to be 1994's Pulp Fiction. A really well-known movie. I don't think it needs that much introduction. I don't think even people who haven't seen it probably, in terms of iconic scenes, this one I feel like is pretty high up on the list there.
Yep, I think this is Pulp Fiction is one of those movies you've probably seen just through the amount of times it's been referenced in other films. But no, a trilogy of crime noir tales brought together and shown in a very interesting order to create Tarantino's true breakout movie, which is obviously 1974's Pulp Fiction. Introducing into the cast Samuel Jackson, Bruce Willis, Tim Roth again making an appearance along with Ving Rhames and Uma Thurman, and of course John Travolta. The film obviously being most noteworthy for giving us our longest Tarantino cameo ever. But all that is to come on our next episode. But until then, thank you to my co-host Kim, and thank you everyone for listening, and we'll be back next time to talk about 94's Pulp Fiction. Until then, good night.